Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All right, this morning we're going to explore chapter 17 of the Bhagavad Gita. But before I entered into the chapter, there's a perspective I wanted to bring to this. And because there's not that many people who come to this threshold, understanding the purpose of these last three chapters is not apparent. So I thought I would kind of recontextualize what these three chapters are addressing. They're addressing the manifestation of one who has come to the absolute truth. So a soul has an option to manifest or not manifest at every stage of the journey, but especially at this stage. What's the difference between a being who's come to the absolute truth, as we've seen in even before chapter 15, is the nature of the universe is being revealed to them. They're no longer operating within the context of what can be known through their individuality, even their spiritual individuality. They're actually beginning to experience and observe universal forces at work, not only in the collective consciousness, but within other people. For example, what Eckhart Tolle calls a pain body is a reflection of something of the universal forces finding their expression through an ancestral karmic stream that the person who becomes the recipient of becomes an unwitting emanation of that collective pain, that collective sorrow, that collective error. These beings who carry pain bodies, usually when it gets initiated, had in their own time, some time in the past, in the course of their lives, somewhere along that ancestral karma, there was a being that began to access universal forces. And they got seduced by the habit of ego, seduced by the intoxications and the powers and the forces that come to one when they step out of the individual paradigm and start operating in the universal paradigm. These are very intoxicating states. When they come, and they can come very strongly, you can actually form alliances with specific energies that are working in the collective, be they beings or be they emanations of beings, for good and for ill. And the forces that can intoxicate you are just larger versions of what the individual forces of sin and virtue or divine or undivine. So when one begins to universalize, which happens after the 12th chapter, their system is capable of transmuting, of receiving, of accessing these forces. Then the discrimination has to be of a different order than what was required just for their own individual transformation. Because they have to see the origins, they have to see the root causes, the root nature of these influences and where they come from. And in the 12th chapter, the consciousness is so inclusive that it's able to be with what other individuals would not tolerate to be with and accept that in the overall universal purpose of things. Destruction, creation, positive, negative, virtue and sin. They all have a role to play. And there isn't a moral compass in the usual sense. There is the experience of the oneness. There is experience as I am in you and you are in me and we're all one and interconnected. That is definitely there. But as one begins to develop on that universal aspect of the journey, you start meeting influences that if there isn't guidance, if there isn't correct information, if there aren't scriptural injunctions, then you could lose your way and unwittingly become a vehicle for undivine forces. Because now you're interested. You're interesting to these universal forces. When one wakes up from their individuality, it's like the universe notes. And yes, there are a tremendous number of good forces, positive forces, that are seeking to assist such a being in their further development and in their manifestation. There are also negative forces, also at work. They can be very seductive. They can be very enticing. They can appeal to the part of the individual that's not reached maturity, the part of the human being that is still not resolved and transformed can be influenced by these forces. So at the entry point can seem absolutely true and good, but there needs to be checkpoints along the way, or else it's likely that without knowing it, you could be diverted from the forces of the divine forces to the undivine forces without even knowing it. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, people who we would consider divine beings, Bhishma, Karna, Kripa, manifest exalted states as human beings. They still carried the arrogance of the ego. They still carried the blind spots that ego provides for the evolving consciousness. And that's why they were on the opposite side of Krishna and the Pandavas. Because they were, without thinking they were fighting for the right cause, they ended up fighting in opposition to the original intent of the creation. They became resisting and opposing forces to the evolving purpose of the manifestation. So in these last three chapters, 16, yoga, divine and undivine, 17, the yoga of the threefold faith, 18, the yoga of the manifestation. These are acting as information for one who has come to this universal state. The first is this recognition that evil exists, that destructive forces exist, that are here to oppose the evolutionary movement of existence. That's what chapter 16 was about, divine and undivine forces. So when one is in this state, one doesn't have the experience of the undivine being any different than the divine. There is not the discrimination that comes from a moral upbringing or an ethical upbringing. It is a complete different perception because they see it all as necessary. The dark and the light is all necessary. So the usual ways of discerning what serves the evolutionary purpose and what doesn't may not be apparent because they both serve in their own ways. So this is why our Krishna spoke of divine and undivine attributes at the beginning of the 16th chapter. Because our tendency to drift one way or another has to do with something with our innate nature. It has something to do with the piece of the ancestral karma each of us are carrying. And it gets magnified in its ability to have a powerful effect on the world at this point. So this is it, bringing to Arjuna's attention, the evolving soul's attention, that now that he has come to this place, there's another set of guidelines or principles for knowing what is divine or undivine. And this is where it's the scriptural injunctions. When I have met, because I meet many mature souls, the ones who suffer the most on the spiritual journey have fallen in the past. They have been waylaid. They have misused their powers for selfish reasons. Lust, greed, or anger, and power effectively, can seduce the developed soul into diverting from the most positive, highest path. And this can create a devolving, a veiling of the attainment, such that when the person takes a birth, they have to go through an ordeal that wouldn't normally have to happen for a human being. So when I meet people like this, it is clear that there are bigger forces than individual forces that are at work in their system. Some of these are reflected in what we would call pain body. Some people, it's reflected in a mental illness. Others, it's affected by ragings or periodic, very powerful aspects of themselves that can be very negative, pieces of themselves that can be very negative. So as the being takes another birth, their purpose is to clean up that accumulated error, and the power of that error, the pain and the suffering required, is greater than would be for an ordinary human being who is naturally unfolding in their journey. So I've seen this, and I've seen the costs. So I know that every being who takes an error will eventually, in one era of time or another, have to come back and resolve it from the level it was created from. You can't resolve it, even as a transcendent being, even as a God-realized being, even as a truth being. It cannot be resolved except, again, in a body. And of course, this has a purpose. Because if this person is successful in resolving it, then by transforming their own undivine attributes into divine attributes, they heal a piece of the collective karma that no individual could heal in their own transformation. So they are very, to what we would call redeem or convert that aspect of ourselves or the people who come to us into divine. Then the healing has repercussions throughout the collective consciousness. So people come to me and I recognize that they're here for the purpose of healing at the universal level. That their sadhana is of an extraordinarily different quantum than an individual emerging for the first time to the higher states of the universal. And I recognize their role in that. But it's a redemption role. They have to learn how to be with pain, suffering, limitation, obstacles, resistances, negativities in their own nature that others would never have to encounter. Okay, so that's one part of what I wanted to say before we start this chapter. The second part is that the yoga of the threefold faith is pulling together things that were shared in chapters 2, 3, 4, 5. Except now, the same principles hold true, but now you're become a universal being with a much more powerful impact on the world because you're closer to the source. You're not out at the edges of the circumference. You're closer to the source. So your actions have a more powerful impact on the collective consciousness. So I thought I would just do a quick review of a few of these. Going back to chapter 3, verse 128. Action becomes a cause of bondage in this world only when it's not performed as a sacrifice. Therefore, perform action efficiently as a sacrifice only, without being attached. So, later it goes on to say, actions originate from Brahman, the imperishable. Therefore, the all-pervading imperishable is always present in sacrifice. So therefore, when it comes to manifestation, the attitude of sacrifice becomes even more critical for one who is in that state of consciousness. They need to not relax because now it's all complete and finished and resolved. If they're choosing to manifest, then they have to reorient themselves to be able to function in the world in such a way that the world is enhanced through their actions. Otherwise, they should not take any action. Stay in their samadhi, stay in the cave. Because the evolutionary purpose, they can throw it or enhance by their actions at that point. So there's a tremendous sense of responsibility that Krishna is pointing to at this stage of the journey for one who's come to this state of consciousness. Acts of sacrifice, charity, and austerity should always be performed, even by the wise man, one who has attained the final state, for the maintenance of world order, for the evolutionary intent to fulfill itself. So there is now a descending of the consciousness back down into the world in these last 3 chapters. One is this encounter with evil, this encounter with destructive forces. Second is organizing the person in which this has happened to, such that their actions are aligned with the maintenance of world order. That means those principles, those values, those ethics, those moralities that has maintained the evolution of mankind up to this point in the evolutionary sequence. So this chapter and the next chapter is a pointing to what needs to happen in the descending consciousness as it enters into the world. Yes, it's absolutely free. Yes, it has all the powers and the forces. Yes, it sees the truth, and yet itself, in its core, cannot be affected by these things. But it will be, there are anything that makes a person inclined to return for manifestation means there is a motive in them that still comes from their human conditioning, and that can be negative or positive, and it may not at all be obvious to the person in this state of consciousness that these qualities remain in them. They're still in their subconscious or their unconscious, and these can be the entry point by which manifestation can be not serving the evolutionary purpose. So, at the end of chapter 16, Krishna said to Arjuna in verse 593, "One who does not follow the scriptural injunctions and acts under the impulse of desire does not attain perfection, nor happiness, nor the highest goal." So, he's saying to one who is now Arjuna. Arjuna is now becoming Krishna. Arjuna is now descending into the world of the creation. And he is saying that one must follow the scripture. There are rules of this game. You must follow the rules of this game, and the portion of those rules that serve the evolutionary purpose. So it does not attain perfection, nor happiness, nor the highest goal. The highest goal, the perfection, of course, he said before, is the mastery of the 3 gunas. In the chapter spoken of the gunas, chapter 14, just before chapter 15, perfect perfection is the ability to have mastered the 3 gunas. So now what's happening to a being is he's not just mastering the 3 gunas in his own system or in his own environment. He's talking about mastering the 3 universal forces that are at work in the collective consciousness, and they're always moving, always influencing the collective consciousness. So you will not be able to be useful without following the scriptural injunctions to the evolutionary direction of the collective consciousness. Okay, so that's my introduction. Now I'd like to get into chapter 17, Traya Vihaga Yoga, the Yoga of the Threefold Faith.
Chapter 17, the Yoga of the Threefold Faith. Arjuna said, "Krishna, those who worship gods with faith, but perform sacrifices without following the injunctions of scriptures, to which category of faith do they belong? Sattva, rajas, or tamas?"
Okay, let's stop right here. Just because Arjuna is now alert. Krishna has given him the heads up. You are now entering in a whole different arena. And he said, oh shit, everything matters. Oh shit, I better know what I'm doing. So the question is, how can I do this, and how do I know if I'm deceiving myself? You know, what is it that will keep me on track? What is it that will allow me to know what is the right action? This thread, this knowingness, is faith. This quality of knowing from where you are something of the nature of where you're headed, even if there's no evidence. But now this is supreme faith. This is the faith of one who's come to the planet for a purpose beyond itself. This is knowing not to trust any appearances, that no matter how destructive or how badly things go, that there is a reason for this that's beyond what may be apparent, even for one who's in this state of consciousness. So the supreme faith becomes like a laser in terms of the knowingness that everything that's arising is a showing of what needs to be seen in order for the intent to be manifest. And to discern from what's arising, what is that intent? Because it may not be apparent, even to one who's in that state. Just as anyone who's in a situation where there's a tremendous amount going on around them, they can't think calmly or discern clearly. So too, when one has entered into the arena of Prakriti, it's an endless movement of action, an endless effects and causes and effects that are going on in the collective and in the individual. And it can be bewildering. So how this supreme faith comes is this knowing yourself. I know who I am. That grounding in the reality of the sat, of the truth of what you are. This then stands like a rock in a turbulent ocean with the waves crashing against it. This is the one that has a place by which it can take action from. So this orientation, the way we move into relationship to this anchored part of us, is proportional to the gunas that are in our innate system or available to us. Sattva, rajas, and tamas. The sattva being truer, and therefore the faith clearer, the path clearer, the resolve clearer. Rajas, where it's not as clear and can be confusing. Or tamas, where it's obscured and error is very likely, very possible.
The Blessed Lord said, Arjuna, the faith of embodied beings is of three types, sattva, rajasic, and tamasic. These are born of their innate nature. Now know it from me. The faith of the being is always molded by his innate nature. Man is basically made of faith. Whatever is the nature of his faith, he attains that.
Okay. So this word faith has a much more powerful meaning than our normal human understanding of faith. You know, there are the three principles. There is the belief or disbelief, which rises from the mental plane. There's trust or distrust that rises from the vital plane, right? The mental plane is what you believe. It's your ideas, it's your opinions, it's your point of view. In the vital plane, trust or distrust is a feeling state. I can trust you, I don't trust you. It's safe, it's not safe. It's more in the vital nature, more in the life force. And then there is faith. Faith draws its origin from the soul, from the Atman, from that central core principle that has taken a birth for a purpose. And that central core principle that has a purpose for being on the planet, knows it or not, we call it Dharma. And that Dharma, that purpose, can manifest itself when we find those actions that are aligned with our purpose. So when our faith is strong, if we take an action that's not aligned with our Dharma, we know it. We feel diminished. We feel limited. We feel something's wrong. And when we take an action that is aligned with this faith, faith and Dharma are very interrelated. Dharma is the dynamic expression of faith. Faith is the innate nature. It is actually what it is at the core level of the soul, not the personality, the core level of your purpose on the planet. So the faith is our compass. The faith is the one that knows right or true from untrue for us, for each of us. And this carries on our journey all the way up into the spiritual, all along on the spiritual path. This essential capacity for knowing what's true and what's not true. It arises from our central being, and it is coded by our innate nature, the purpose of this particular lifetime. That's why every being who comes to the universal state and starts manifesting doesn't show up to be exactly the same, because each one of them carries something of that innate nature from which their realization was able to grow from, to take shape. So the soul, the innate nature, is the seed of you. It's the seed of your manifestation. The manifestation can become a tree, or it can become a twig, or become a weed. It has many different ways it can manifest. So in the course of our life, our ability to discern intuitively what is right or what is not right is proportional to our ability to be clear from these negative influences of the condition, the human condition we find ourselves born into, and the natural desires and impulses and distortions that we inherited or were conditioned by, or that we took on accidentally or unwittingly. So if these are still surrounding us, then of course we can't even enter into the spiritual path. Or if we do, we can't hold it, because these distorting influences are preventing our faith from being known to us. We'll mistake the signals. And error is 90% of the journey. Correction is the other 90%. We're constantly correcting. But at this state now, there is this return to the pristine condition of consciousness. So when one has come to the 15th chapter, one is, for more or less purposes, come to its pristine state of consciousness in its original purity, and the clarity of the innocence, the clarity of the nature is fully there. But it hasn't started acting yet. Once it starts acting, because it's so light, because it's so bright, because it's so pure, everything that's not light, not pure, is attracted to it. It's wanting to come to the light to be resolved. So the darkness of the universe comes to the light to be resolved. So this being starts getting bombarded by these divine and undivine forces. And if they do not know what's going on, if they don't have a correct, sufficient understanding of the nature of the three gunas, and the nature of how the human condition has gotten to be where it is, and the ego and the human system, they could be veiled. Not that their original pure nature can be lost, but it can be veiled, and it can take mistaken actions, thinking it's taking the right action. There's no evil done that isn't from the basis of thinking you're taking the right action. It's just your context for that is limited, not true, distorted, without you perhaps knowing it, or certainly not knowing it. Being driven by desire, for example, the real enemy that was revealed in the 3rd chapter, where Arjuna asks, what is it that causes man to commit sin even against his own will? Excuse me, that was the 6th chapter. And he says, it's the force of desire and anger that rises from rajas, and it is the real enemy. So even a realized being is subject to this force because it's the animating force of existence. And it's available in human beings because we can choose. We have intelligence. We carry a piece of the Supreme in us. So this desire force that drives all of existence is very developed in the human being, acutely affected by it. So knowing yourself, knowing what's going on when the universe starts coming at you, with all its attractions and its seductions and its attacks, all its traps and attacks, you have to have vigilance. You have to have a way of returning yourself to the purity that has come. And that's what this chapter and the next chapter are pointing to, is this need to keep purifying your system should you enter into the arena of action, the arena of manifestation. Okay, let's continue.
Men with sattwic nature worship gods. Rajasic people worship demigods and demons. Tamasic people worship spirits and ghosts. Men of egoistic temperament, being full of self-eulogy and possessed with desire, attachment, and passion, perform penance by torturing their own system arbitrarily without following scriptural injunctions, senselessly emaciating the elements in the body and torturing me, the indweller. These demonic people perform severe austerities.
Okay, let me expand on this a bit because there's a number of things being revealed here. First, in chapter 598, it's basically saying that if you're sattvic of nature, then you're going to head towards at least the domain of gods, because sattva doesn't exist beyond the gods. So in the inclination of the innate nature, or the inclination of the manifestation, for the most part, what can manifest is sattva. What manifests typically the highest clarity of what action to take occurs when the guna of sattva is dominant. And when one acts on that, the ability, the faith, is of such that it can see clearly, more clearly, than when the faith is rajasic or tamasic. So the one who has the sattvic faith, it's pulled to the highest. It's drawn to the highest. Therefore, it's not going to get diverted by these powerful forces that can exist before you get to the highest. It's not going to be seduced by these influences, which would happen if you're rajasic or tamasic. So if a rajasic person worships the demigods and demons, that means they worship the power. Rajas is addicted to power. It wants power, it wants control, it wants influence. And because the universal forces come through a system proportional to their nature, force comes through them. And they are powerful. They express influence. They can impact other people's systems energetically. A more sattvic person, there is a force, but it's more transcendent, more uplifting, inspiring. It carries a force, because every one of us carries sattva, rajas, and tamas. It's not the predominant quality they bring forward. Demigods and demons. Now, demigods are serving they're the dynamic expression of the gods, which rest in their awareness and their presence, and they're the beauties, extensions of the gods that help manifest the creation. And then they too create, they divert. There are those that come to help the manifestation of the creation to the demigods, and some that resist the manifestation of the creation. We talked about this in the previous chapter. The demigods being divine, serving the divine, and the demons for serving the undivine. Now, it's not revealed here in these verses, but in Vedic terminology, there's the Ashuric, and there is the demonic forces. The Ashuric forces are misguided expressions of the divine intent, getting distorted by personal interest, pride, control, domination, rightness, the things, human failings. They're dynamic in the world. They carry some possibility of being converted. They have some possibility of redeeming, because there's a part of them that suspects they don't know it all. Then there are the demonic forces. The demonic forces cannot be converted. They are literally just destruction for destruction's sake. And the only thing you can do with the demonic forces is destroy them. You destroy them because they're stupid. They're tamasic. They're stupid. They can be destroyed. But the shirks, they're not stupid. They're brilliant, very smart. But they can be converted. You can always convert rajas with sattva. But with tamas, you need to use rajas to destroy it. So that the tamasic people worship spirits and ghosts. Now, if you look in your own self, people who are open spiritually, the first openings will be of seeing ghosts or seeing subtle plane beings. They will be interested in spirits and goblins and ghosts. It's like a childish curiosity about these things. These are, of course, quite minor by the time you get down to what the individual consciousness can see. But that becomes their fascination. So occultism, all these, there is this fascination with that dimension. And that's all you care about. You don't care about the higher dimensions. You don't have access to the heavens. You're not able to see the planes that occur beyond. You're not even interested. In rajas, you can begin to. But in tamas, you're not interested. And you begin to access what I would call the physical and vital forces of the lower nature, the animal energies, the shambhalistic natures, the energies that are in the nature energies we call, closer to the animal or nature kingdom. These are what a tamasic person is more interested in. Okay, then the next part has to do with men of egoistic temperament. You can be an egoist and come to absolute truth. That temperament is the nature. It's the nature. If this person has had a lot of permission to express their ego, they could be an ego without even questioning it. If you were born in a privileged situation and there were people who, because of that privilege, supported your ego or enhanced your ego, you may have an egoistic temperament and not even know you have an egoistic temperament. So then when this comes and you start manifesting, that egoistic inclination will be there. The arrogance, the unexamined assumptions, the demand, the insistence, it'll all be there. Only you're now carrying universal forces. Now, these aren't necessarily bad. People of egoistic temperament, that had something to do with their innate nature. It had something to do with their dharma. It's perfectly acceptable in terms of manifestation. You need strong egos for some aspects of the manifestation. You don't want always compromising, accepting, loving egos. You need strong egos. That's what Arjuna was. He was a strong ego. He was a recognized warrior of his time, greatly revered, greatly honored. He had a lot of pride, a lot of sense of his worth. So he's describing something, this self-eulogy, possessed with desire, attachment, and passion. And then what these beings do, if they feel they need to correct for their nature, they go to the extreme. If they feel they've committed sin, what they do for their redemption is to torture themselves, is to beat themselves up, to actually destroy the divinity within themselves, to overcompensate for that part of themselves when they see it. So this is the nature. No ego gets to stay. An ego gets to stay in egoistic nature for long. Suddenly it'll be collapsed because ego is not true. It cannot stand. So this person will be inclined to go to feeling very confident and strong to feeling worthless, collapsed, and destroyed. So what they will do with that rajasic in their system, they'll compensate for that by severe austerities. The Gita has always said, this is not our path. Temperate, to be moderate in all of these, the middle path. So this torturing of the indweller has never been the purpose of the Gita. So, but it's a symptom of one who's driven by passion, one whose system is rajasic. Senselessly emaciating the elements in the body and torturing me, the indweller, these demonic people perform severe austerities. So it means they do extreme sacrifices that are not necessary. It is an overcompensation. And then they get addicted to them. Then this becomes the means by which they validate themselves, is in that almost masochistic torturing of themselves. Or they may use their resentment or anger and they'll torture themselves in order to get back. So people of this sort can start evoking forces to have negative outcomes occur for people, for those around them. And they, because of their position in their consciousness, they're very powerful. If someone takes a sacrifice at that state of consciousness, even if it's for an undivine purpose, the universe can't but respond. It has to respond. And therefore, they become part of the manifestation of undivine forces into the creation. Okay, let's continue.
Depending on the innate nature, the foods, sacrifice, austerity, and charity are also threefold. Know their distinctions from me. Foods that ensure longevity, virtue, vigor, and vitality, good health, joy, and happiness, and which are tasteful and easily digestible, are dear to people of sattwic nature. Food that is bitter, sour, acidic, salty, reheated, pungent, dry, burning, and which leads to sickness, disease, and grief, is liked by people of rajasic disposition. Food that has become stale, tasteless, polluted by germs and insects, and leftovers, is liked by people of tamasic nature.
Okay. So now we're stepping into Krishna answering Arjuna's questions specifically. Arjuna said, those who worship, perform sacrifices, injunctions of scriptures. So Krishna is explaining what these are. So food is one of the injunctions of the scriptures, because food affects the consciousness. Food affects the innate nature. If you eat food that's been prepared by a violent person, it will create a tendency for violence in you. If you eat food that comes from animals, the density of the animal vibration will go into the cells of your body, and your body will carry on some of that density. So food is part of the scriptural injunctions, as are sacrifice, austerity, and charity. So these are now a clarification on what are the injunctions and what are the three aspects of each of the injunctions, sattva, rajas, or tamas. Go ahead.
The sacrifices that are performed just as a duty without any expectation or result motive and are in conformity with the scriptural injunctions are sattwic in nature. The sacrifices that are performed with an expectation of result and rewards, as also for ostentation, are rajasic by nature. A sacrifice that is contrary to scriptural injunctions, without food offerings, prayers, gifts to the priests, and is devoid of faith, is said to be tamasic.
Sacrifice, of course, is action. That in the sacrifice, the Brahman is present in all sacrifice. So if we look at the nature of the sacrifice, it's when we offer something up or give something up, forfeit something for something higher. So the nature of sacrifice is we're stepping out of our box, setting out of our inclinations, our behavior, our patterns, and we're making some sacrifice for a higher good. We're restraining our bad temper. We're offering up something we're attached to. We're performing action that takes effort on our part, that is different than what we would otherwise choose to do if we were following our impulses and our inclinations and our preferences. So a sacrificing is a forfeiting. of something that we have for something that we don't yet have, not even that. Well, that's also maybe to some extent. It's a giving up of what we have, we'll say that much. Hoping to get something out of it is another conversation. So these are, we can do these from sattva, rajas, or tamas. So not all sacrifices are perfectly pure. All sacrifices have Brahman present, but a tamasic sacrifice is more veiled by self-interest, by the ego, the personality, than a sattvic sacrifice. The capacity and the effectiveness of the sacrifices, therefore, are proportional. Because the creation is being manifested, is evolving through sacrifice, through the actions that are done in sacrifice. The more effective ones are the more sattvic ones. The less effective ones are the tamasic or the rajasic ones. Proportional. Okay?
Worship of the gods, the twice-born, the spiritual masters, and the wise, and maintaining purity, simplicity, celibacy, and nonviolence are said to be the austerities of the body. Words that do not cause distress and are truthful, agreeable, and beneficial, and also the study of scriptures. These are the austerities of speech. Serenity of mind, equanimity, inner silence, self-control, and the ability to feel the presence of the inner being. These are the austerities of the mind.
Okay, so austerity is different than sacrifice. Austerity is the effort we apply. Austerity is the discipline we apply. It can include getting information about something that we don't know. It can include actions by which we restrain or we take actions that we have to apply effort for to do. So they're related to sacrifice, but they're the actual efforting, the discipline of it. There is this recognition of, like, for example, words that do not cause distress, truthful, agreeable, and beneficial, which means you're not speaking anything other than words that create this effect. So the impulsiveness of speech is being restrained in the austerity of the intent to only express truth that is beneficial, truth that serves the highest good, not your truth because the person's an idiot and needs to hear the right information, but the truth that serves the highest good in that situation. And of course, you're not going to be able to see the highest good unless you're in sattva, because it's going to be distorted by your rajasic reaction about what is the highest good, and you need to be right about what is the highest good. Or the tamasic reaction, which doesn't want to have anything to do with these idiots. Got to find these in yourself. But the nature of words, there's worship of the twice-born, the spiritual masters, the wise, maintaining purity, simplicity, celibacy, and non-violence. So this is maintaining. It's a constant discipline, a constant action. The worshiping comes natural, or maybe not natural, but it's, you could call it as reverence or respect to the gods or those who have been twice born, the awakened beings. Words, this again is about, word of course is an action. So speak is an action. So again, austerity is the ability to control the action of speech. Serenity of mind, the inner silence, self-control and the ability to feel the presence of the inner being. This is the austerity of the mind. That means the ability to control the mind produces these effects. The mind becomes quiet. The mind becomes obedient. It follows the higher prompting. This ability to hold, not let the mind's restlessness overtake you, is the austerity of the mind. Okay?
When these threefold austerities are performed without any expectation and with supreme faith, they are said to be sattwic. The austerity that is performed with the motive of gain, name, fame, honor, or wealth, and is practiced with a lot of effort for ensuring these gains, is rajasic penance. It is transitory and unstable. Austerity that is practiced with a deluded notion and is aimed at harming others and is performed with self-torture is tamasic austerity.
So the paradox is that the austerity, the motive of the austerity, is what determines its outcome. So if the motive for the austerity is sattwic, then it's self-giving. It's sacrificing for the highest good. If it's rajasic, it's distorted by whatever desire or power or need that's there in the rajasic system. And if it's tamasic, it doesn't know which way is up. It's just acting out without knowing why it's acting out. So the austerity practice with a deluded notion, it's saying that because Brahman is in all sacrifice, and austerity is an expression of sacrifice, that a person can make sacrifice for the purpose of doing harm, for purpose of destroying things. They blow up planes. They kill innocents, thinking they're doing for the right cause. They're easily influenced, easily distorted, waylaid. And they can perform these austerities with wrong information, wrong understanding, not even having a full insight into what it is they're doing. They're just tools of these undivine influences. Okay.
A gift that is given with a sense of duty and without any motive of reward, in a right place, at a right time, and to a right person, is a sattwic gift. A gift given grudgingly with a hope of receiving something in return is rajasic. A gift given at a wrong place to an unworthy person or without respect or with insult is a tamasic gift.
Okay, so then this is the last of the three expressions. Of the scriptural instructions, and that they've gone through up to now, and that is this charity, the sense of charity, the sense of generosity, of giving, and the gift. It's not so much addressing what is the gift, because a giving thing can also be a sacrifice, just as sacrifice and austerity, giving, self-giving. Giving of yourself, giving of your resources, giving of your time, giving of your money, is also an injunction that it serves us to give to others, to give to the world, to give to the things that we see by our own innate nature serves the highest good, to empower that. Not just for our own self-serving, ideally, because we give gifts to the people we like much more than we give to people we don't like, right? We give gifts to those that are important to us much more than we do with who are not important to us. So the nature of our gift giving is also shaped by the design of our nature, sattva, rajas, or tamas. So a sattvic gift is always going to be appropriate to the situation. A rajasic gift is going to be self-serving in some way. A tamasic gift will be just following what's required, buying presents for Christmas, even though you don't want to do it. Okay.
Om Tat Sat is the threefold attribute of the Supreme. It is from this that the Brahmins, the Vedas, and the sacrifices came.
Okay. So, Om Tat Sat. So in my teachings, Sat is the unmanifest principle, the eternal unchanging reality. Tat is the creation, all that is manifest, all thatness that there is. And Om is the manifesting force of consciousness, the primal sound, originating from the Sat, entering into the Tat, and that originating from the Sat, entering into the Tat, is Chit, consciousness. So the Om is expression of the manifesting force of consciousness into creation. So this is the primary Om Tat Sat. You're evoking all three principles. That's why it's a powerful mantra, because it evokes the basic ABCs of this existence. Okay?
Therefore, acts of sacrifice, charity, and austerity are performed after uttering Om by the knower of the Vedas, uttering the word Tat and expecting no reward and performing acts of sacrifice, charity, and austerity. The seekers aspire for liberation. The word Sat is used to denote goodness, virtue, and truth.
Okay.
It is also used to symbolize an auspicious act.
So it's actually a technique. This is a mantra that if prior to taking action you perform, it allows your system to move into alignment with the highest possibility in its manifestation from where you are. So in the manifestation of the Om, acts are performed after uttering Om, you're aligning yourself with the Brahman, with the original creative force that enters in, as it enters into existence. You are aligning yourself with the original intent. When you say Tat, you are in the creation. You're therefore taking actions at the highest good, the highest possibility for the manifestation of the evolutionary purpose that's available for you to take in any one moment, any one time, in any one set of circumstances. And Sat is simply the return to the original conditions. Ultimately, that's where it'll all end up. If the creation fulfills its purpose, then Om will fulfill itself as Sat. So all actions done aligned with these three principles is a technique, and that's explaining it to some extent. When you're in doubt about the nature of the scriptural injunctions and where you are on the journey, then this is a means of aligning yourself as best as possible in your consciousness by becoming aware, paying attention, taking a moment of now with whatever is arising, and being able to return to the anchor, the rock, the purpose of what it is that you are and why you're here, and then acting from that place. Okay?
Steadfastness in acts of sacrifice, charity, and austerity, and any action that is dedicated to God is also termed as Sat. Sacrifice, charity, or austerity performed without faith is asat. These are of no use in this world, nor in the world beyond.
Steadfastness. Steadfastness. That's the manifestation of the Sat into existence. Everything else in existence comes and goes, comes and goes. I feel like it, I don't feel like it, oh, I can do it today, I can't do it today. Steadfastness has something of the characteristic of the quality of the Sat. So this ability to persevere, this ability to stay with it, this ability to endure calmly, this ability to hold the impossible, this steadfastness is a manifestation of that original intent expressed to the person. Holding the course. That any of these injunctions that are performed without faith, doing it because you're supposed to do it, doing it with being coded, being distorted, have no impact. So when a human being acts, they mostly act just out of the impulses of their ego, just out of the conditioning. Their actions have very little effect. They're just debris being carried along in the intentional force, the evolutionary force of existence. They do not serve or oppose. They're just debris that's being carried along. So most human beings are just being carried along by the universal forces. But at this point, one is here to strengthen that movement, to purify, to direct, to affect that movement. It has to have faith. Every current is moving from one place to another. Everything in this creation is in a process, in space and time, in duality, causality. So it has a beginning and a middle and an end. It's ending up somewhere. And one who has come to the state of where it's ending up, their actions further and correct and strengthen the move of this current towards that outcome. If not, it's a wasted action. It has no power. It's not undivine. It does not fulfill the purpose of one who has come to the state of consciousness. Okay, so this is my experience. I know that when I first began to read these chapters, it just seemed to be information. It didn't seem to be relevant to all the other parts of the Gita. It just seemed like they were laying on you a bunch more information about how the gunas worked and some of these little quirks about the nature of faith. But actually there is this manual for one who's come to this state in consciousness. And it can be tremendously empowering to recognize that this necessity to continue to purify the system, to continue to remain true to the realization that's come, is absolutely necessary. Because you can unwittingly defeat or obscure powerfully this evolutionary purpose of existence, and unwittingly become an expression of those forces. So this impeccability, this perfection, this resolve to continue to be questioning yourself, to test yourself, to look outside of yourself for the universal principles. Because even though you're free, completely, absolutely free, you are in the world still. And your actions make a difference, especially your purposeful actions. So it would be better not to manifest at all than to manifest not aligned with what the creation needs to maintain the world order. Because with you knowing it or not, people are following your example. People are following your lead. Because you're manifesting an expression of the divinity itself that's not ordinary. And people are pulled to that expression. So your example is what they will look to if they can't know anything else. So becoming aware of the fact that not only we make a difference, but at this stage we make a powerful difference beyond what we would normally be able to see, is what this chapter is pointing to. So that's my experience.
Thus ends the 17th chapter of Gita, entitled The Yoga of Threefold Faith.
Okay, all glory to Buddha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Love and truth.